In 1996, Consumer Reports did something unprecedented. They refused to recommend a vehicle solely because it was too dangerous to drive. That vehicle was the Isuzu Trooper, and their testing showed it would roll over during routine emergency maneuvers that other SUVs handled easily. Isuzu's response: they sued Consumer Reports for $242 million, claiming the tests were unfair. But here's what makes this story incredible. Consumer Reports had video evidence of the Trooper literally lifting off the ground during what should have been simple lane changes. The Trooper had a rollover rate that was documented to be significantly higher than comparable SUVs, and by the end of this video, I'll show you the exact engineering reasons why this happened, the real test footage that sparked the controversy, and how this single vehicle changed automotive safety testing forever. The Isuzu Trooper story isn't just about one dangerous SUV, it's about how vehicle design, safety testing, and consumer protection all collided in the 1990s. This controversy involved real engineering problems, documented test results, and a legal battle that changed how we evaluate vehicle safety. What makes this story fascinating is that it's all documented. We have the test footage, the engineering specifications, the court records, and the government investigation reports. This isn't speculation, it's a case study in automotive engineering and safety regulation. I'm going to walk you through exactly what made the Trooper prone to rollover, how Consumer Reports discovered the problem, and what this controversy taught us about SUV safety that's still relevant today: the engineering problem. To understand why the Trooper was prone to rollover, we need to look at three key measurements: track width, wheelbase, and center of gravity height. The 1995 Isuzu Trooper had a track width of 58.5 inches and stood 69.3 inches tall. This gave it a height-to-width ratio that was higher than most SUVs of its era. For comparison, the Ford Explorer had a track width of 60.6 inches and was 67.2 inches tall. The Trooper's center of gravity was measured at 26.1 inches above the ground. Combined with its narrow track, this created what engineers call a low rollover threshold, the amount of lateral force needed to tip the vehicle over. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration measures rollover resistance using the static stability factor, SSF. This is calculated by dividing half the track width by the center of gravity height. The higher the number, the more stable the vehicle. The 1995 Trooper had an SSF of 1.12, while the Ford Explorer had an SSF of 1.16. While both were in the range that NHTSA considered acceptable at the time, the Trooper was at the lower end of that range. But the real problem wasn't just the static measurements, it was how these factors combined during dynamic maneuvers. The Trooper used soft suspension tuning for ride comfort, which allowed significant body roll during cornering. This body roll would shift the center of gravity even higher and further outside the track width. Independent testing by the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety found that the Trooper would lift its inside wheels during emergency lane changes at speeds as low as 35 miles per hour. This wheel lift was a precursor to rollover and indicated that the vehicle was operating very close to its stability limits during routine driving maneuvers. Consumer Reports testing. In 1996, Consumer Reports was conducting their annual SUV testing when they encountered something unprecedented with the Isuzu Trooper. During their standard emergency avoidance maneuver, designed to simulate swerving around an obstacle, the Trooper would consistently lift wheels and, in some cases, roll over. The test involved accelerating to 60 miles per hour, then performing a sharp left turn followed immediately by a sharp right turn, simulating an emergency lane change. This test had been performed on dozens of SUVs over the years, and while some showed concerning body roll, none had actually rolled over. The Trooper was different. Consumer Reports documented that during multiple test runs, the vehicle would lift its inside rear wheel during the initial left turn, then lift inside front wheel during the right turn. In two separate test runs, the vehicle actually rolled over completely. Consumer Reports' testing methodology was based on standards developed by the Society of Automotive Engineers. The maneuver was performed at a constant speed, with standardized steering inputs measured in degrees per second. This wasn't aggressive driving, it was a controlled test designed to measure vehicle limits. The magazine also tested the Trooper's rollover threshold using a tilting platform. They found that the vehicle would tip over when the platform was tilted to just 47.9 degrees. For comparison, the Ford Explorer remained stable stable until 52.1 degrees, and the Chevrolet Blazer until 51.3 degrees. What made Consumer Reports' findings particularly significant was that they had high-speed cameras recording the tests. The footage clearly showed the Trooper's wheels lifting off the ground and the vehicle's tendency to trip over its own wheels during emergency maneuvers. Based on these results, Consumer Reports rated the Trooper as not acceptable, the first time they had ever given this rating to a vehicle solely for rollover concerns. They published their findings in the August 1996 issue with the headline, "Isuzu Trooper Not Acceptable." The lawsuit and response. Isuzu's response to Consumer Reports' findings was swift and aggressive. In July 1996, just weeks after the magazine's report was published, Isuzu filed a $242 million defamation lawsuit against Consumer Reports and its parent organization, Consumers Union. The lawsuit claimed that Consumer Reports' testing methodology was flawed and that the magazine had deliberately designed tests to make the Trooper fail. Isuzu argued that the emergency maneuver test was more severe than real-world driving conditions, and that no reasonable driver would perform such maneuvers. Isuzu hired their own testing firm, Dynamic Research Incorporated, to conduct alternative tests. These tests used different parameters, lower speeds, gentler steering inputs, and different tire pressures. Under these modified conditions, the Trooper performed better, though it still showed more body roll and wheel lift than comparable SUVs. Consumer Reports stood by their testing methodology and results. They pointed out that their test procedures were based on established automotive engineering standards and had been used consistently across all vehicles they tested. They also noted that the Trooper was the only SUV that had failed these tests. The legal battle intensified when Consumer Reports released additional footage showing the Trooper rolling over during testing. This video evidence was difficult for Isuzu to dispute, as it clearly showed the vehicle's instability during emergency maneuvers. The case went to discovery, where both sides had to share internal documents and testing data. This process revealed that Isuzu had conducted their own internal rollover testing and had identified stability concerns with the Trooper's design. However, the company had concluded that the vehicle met existing safety standards and proceeded with production. In 1999, Isuzu quietly dropped the lawsuit without any public settlement announcement. By this time, the controversy had significantly damaged Trooper sales, and Isuzu was already working on a redesigned version of the vehicle. NHTSA Investigation. The Consumer Reports controversy prompted the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration to launch their own investigation into the Trooper's rollover characteristics. This investigation, designated EA 96-020, began in August 1996 and involved both computer modeling and physical testing. NHTSA's testing used their standard rollover evaluation protocol, which was different from Consumer Reports' methodology. The agency used a J-turn maneuver, a gentler S-curve designed to simulate avoiding an obstacle in the road. They also tested at multiple speeds and with different loading conditions. The results of NHTSA's testing were mixed. While the Trooper showed higher levels of wheel lift and body roll compared to other SUVs, it did not roll over during the agency's standard tests. However, NHTSA noted that the vehicle operated close to its stability limits and showed concerning characteristics during emergency maneuvers. NHTSA also analyzed real-world rollover data from police reports and insurance claims. This analysis showed that the Trooper had a higher rollover rate in single-vehicle crashes compared to similar SUVs, though the agency noted that multiple factors could contribute to these statistics. The investigation revealed important differences between laboratory testing and real-world conditions. Variables such as road surface, tire condition, vehicle loading, and driver response could all affect rollover risk. NHTSA concluded that while the Trooper showed elevated rollover risk in testing, it was difficult to establish a direct causal relationship with real-world crashes. In 1998, NHTSA closed the investigation without requiring a recall. The agency stated that while the Trooper had marginal stability characteristics, it met existing federal safety standards. However, the investigation led to discussions about updating rollover testing procedures and safety standards for SUVs. Design changes and improvements. The controversy surrounding the original Trooper led Isuzu to make significant design changes for the 1998 model year. These changes addressed many of the stability issues identified in the Consumer Reports testing. The most significant change was widening the track width from 58.5 inches to 61.4 inches. This 2.9-inch increase significantly improved the vehicle's static stability factor and reduced its tendency to lift wheels during cornering. The wider track was achieved by redesigning the suspension geometry and using different wheel offsets. Isuzu also lowered the vehicle's center of gravity by redesigning the floor pan and repositioning some components. The new design reduced the center of gravity height by approximately 1.2 inches, further improving stability. The suspension tuning was revised to reduce body roll during cornering. Isuzu installed larger anti-roll bars and revised the spring and damper rates to provide better control during emergency maneuvers while maintaining ride comfort. These changes were substantial enough that the redesigned Trooper was essentially a different vehicle from a stability standpoint. Independent testing by various organizations showed that the new Trooper performed much better in rollover tests and had stability characteristics similar to other SUVs in its class. The improvements came at a cost, however. The wider track required new tooling and manufacturing processes, and the suspension changes increased production costs. Isuzu also had to redesign other components to accommodate the wider stance, including the body panels and interior packaging. Consumer Reports tested the redesigned Trooper and found that it no longer exhibited the rollover tendencies of the earlier model. The magazine removed its not acceptable rating and began recommending the vehicle again, noting the significant improvements in stability and handling. Impact on industry testing. The Trooper controversy had far-reaching effects on how the automotive industry approaches rollover testing and SUV design. It highlighted the limitations of existing test procedures and led to the development of new evaluation methods. Prior to the Trooper incident, rollover testing was primarily focused on static measurements like the static stability factor. The Consumer Reports testing demonstrated that dynamic testing, evaluating how vehicles behave during actual maneuvers, was necessary to fully assess rollover risk. The Insurance Institute for Highway Safety expanded their testing protocols to include dynamic rollover evaluations. They developed standardized procedures for emergency lane change maneuvers and began publishing rollover ratings based on these tests. NHTSA also revised their rollover evaluation procedures. Though these changes took several years to implement, the agency eventually developed a star rating system for rollover resistance that combined static measurements with dynamic testing results. The controversy also influenced SUV design across the industry. Manufacturers began paying more attention to track width, center of gravity, and suspension tuning in their SUV designs. The trend toward wider, lower SUVs that began in the late 1990s was partly driven by lessons learned from the Trooper experience. Consumer Reports' willingness to take a strong stance on vehicle safety, despite facing a major lawsuit, established important precedents for automotive journalism. It demonstrated that independent testing organizations could challenge manufacturer claims and influence vehicle design through public reporting. The legal battle also highlighted the tension between manufacturer marketing claims and independent safety evaluation. It showed that vehicles could meet existing government standards while still having significant safety limitations that only became apparent through comprehensive testing. Real-world rollover data. Analysis of real-world crash data provided additional insight into the Trooper's rollover characteristics. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration maintains a database of all reported crashes, which allows for statistical analysis of rollover rates by vehicle model. Data from 1990 to 1997 showed that the Trooper had a higher rate of single-vehicle rollovers compared to other mid-size SUVs. In single-vehicle crashes, the Trooper rolled over in approximately 28% of cases compared to 19% for the Ford Explorer and 16% for the Chevrolet Blazer. However, interpreting this data requires careful consideration of multiple factors. The Trooper was often marketed to buyers interested in off-road capability, which might have led to different usage patterns compared to other SUVs. Vehicles' demographics and typical driving conditions could have influenced crash statistics. The Insurance Institute for Highway Safety conducted their own analysis using insurance claim data. Their study found similar patterns, with the Trooper showing elevated rollover rates in certain types of crashes, particularly those involving emergency maneuvers or loss of control scenarios. Fatality rates in Trooper rollovers were also concerning. The vehicle's roof structure was not as robust as some competitors, leading to higher rates of serious injury when rollovers did occur. This highlighted the importance of not just preventing rollovers, but also protecting occupants when they happen. The real-world data supported the findings from laboratory testing. The Trooper had stability characteristics that made it more prone to rollover in certain situations. However, the data also showed that most Trooper drivers never experienced rollover incidents, indicating that the elevated risk was situational rather than universal. Lessons for modern SUV safety. The Trooper controversy established important principles for SUV safety that remain relevant today. It demonstrated that meeting minimum government standards doesn't necessarily mean a vehicle is as safe as it could be. The incident showed the value of independent testing by organizations like Consumer Reports and the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety. These groups can perform tests that go beyond minimum regulatory requirements and provide consumers with more comprehensive safety information. It also highlighted the importance of dynamic testing versus static measurements. While calculations like the static stability factor provide useful baseline information, they don't capture how vehicles actually behave during emergency maneuvers. The controversy led to improvements in rollover testing methodology across the industry. Modern rollover tests are more comprehensive and better reflect real-world driving conditions than the tests available in the 1990s. For consumers, the Trooper story illustrates the importance of researching vehicle safety beyond manufacturer claims and government ratings. Independent testing organizations provide valuable information that can help buyers make informed decisions. The incident also demonstrated how market forces can drive safety improvements. The negative publicity and sales impact from the Consumer Reports rating motivated Isuzu to make significant design changes that improved the vehicle's safety. Modern SUVs benefit from lessons learned during the Trooper era. Today's SUVs generally have better stability characteristics, more robust roof structures, and more sophisticated electronic stability systems that can help prevent rollovers. Electronic stability control. One of the most significant developments in SUV safety since the Trooper controversy has been the widespread adoption of electronic stability control (ESC) systems. These systems can detect when a vehicle is beginning to lose control and automatically apply brakes to individual wheels to help maintain stability. ESC systems use sensors to monitor vehicle speed, steering angle, and lateral acceleration. When the system detects that the vehicle is not responding as expected to steering inputs, such as during the onset of a rollover, it can intervene to help the driver maintain control. For SUVs like the Trooper, ESC systems can be particularly effective at preventing the type of rollover incidents that occurred during Consumer Reports testing. The system can detect wheel lift and apply corrective braking before the vehicle reaches its rollover threshold. NHTSA made ESC mandatory on all passenger vehicles starting with the 2012 model year, partly in response to lessons learned from SUV rollover incidents in the 1990s and early 2000s. Studies have shown that ESC can reduce single vehicle rollover crashes by up to 80% in SUVs. However, ESC systems are not foolproof. They work within the physical limits of the vehicle, and a poorly designed SUV can still roll over despite having ESC. The system is most effective when combined with good fundamental design, appropriate track width, center of gravity, and suspension tuning. The Trooper's stability issues were so severe that even modern ESC systems might not have been able to prevent all rollover incidents. This underscores the importance of good basic design rather than relying solely on electronic systems to compensate for fundamental problems. Current SUV design trends. Modern SUV design has evolved significantly since the Trooper era, partly in response to lessons learned from rollover incidents. Today's SUVs are generally wider, lower, and more stable than their 1990s predecessors. The trend toward car-based SUV platforms rather than truck-based designs has improved stability characteristics. Car-based SUVs typically have lower centers of gravity and better weight distribution than truck-based vehicles. However, some concerning trends have emerged. The popularity of three-row SUVs has led to taller vehicles with higher centers of gravity. While these vehicles have wider tracks than the Trooper, their height can still create stability challenges. The rise of electric SUVs presents new considerations for rollover safety. Battery packs are typically mounted low in the vehicle, which can lower the center of gravity and improve stability. However, the added weight of batteries can affect handling characteristics in other ways. Manufacturers now use sophisticated computer modeling to optimize SUV designs for rollover resistance. resistance. These tools allow engineers to evaluate thousands of design variations and identify optimal configurations for stability. And despite these improvements, rollover remains a concern for SUVs. While modern vehicles are much safer than the original Trooper, physics still applies. Tall, narrow vehicles will always be more prone to rollover than low, wide ones. The Isuzu Trooper controversy was a watershed moment in automotive safety. It showed how independent testing could identify safety problems that weren't apparent from government standards alone. It demonstrated the importance of comprehensive evaluation methods that go beyond minimum requirements. Most importantly, it proved that public attention and market pressure could drive meaningful safety improvements. The redesigned Trooper was a much safer vehicle because Consumer Reports was willing to take a stand and consumers responded to safety information. The lessons from the Trooper remain relevant today. When evaluating any SUV, look for independent safety ratings, understand the vehicle's stability characteristics, and remember that meeting minimum standards doesn't mean optimal safety. If you found this deep dive into automotive safety engineering interesting, you'll want to see my next video about the tire that exploded and killed 300 people. I'll break down the Firestone tire crisis that affected millions of Ford Explorers and show you how tire design flaws can be just as dangerous as vehicle design problems. Hit subscribe and the notification bell because understanding these engineering failures can help you make better decisions about vehicle safety. The more you know about how these systems work and fail, the better you can protect yourself and your family on the road.